people are talking enough about data management. And so that is a space where I think we are talking about data aggregation, but we're not talking about ongoing data cleaning, right? Like there's a process of getting our data into a certain location, and then becomes the conversation of how do I make sure it's continuously updated and continuously cleaned. And I've had some conversations with a few organizations around this recently. How do I understand the lineage? How do I understand the history and the continuous maintenance of it? And I think that's going to become a bigger conversation over time. A really good example we'll talk about is how inaccurate data can have a really big impact sometime at a sort of life and death matter.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome, everyone, to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We're recording today, April 9th, 2026. We are solidly into spring. Flowers are blooming. Hopefully, mostly everybody is done with the snow. Today, we're going to bring you all the news you can use this week. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm. And joining me today for the conversation, as usual, is my co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, welcome to the show today. We are both home. I think we got some sunshine going on finally in our spheres of the world. But we're getting ready to head out on some busy travel schedules. So this is our last week at home for a while, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think both of us are going to be in two different cities every week for the rest of April, and we'll get into all of that.
Yes.
I know you'll have some international in there, but it's going to be busy, and not only busy for that reason, but of course, because it can't just be one thing, we're also launching the survey. The 29th annual survey.
We're getting ready to be like, what is it when you hit 30? That's not midlife, but it's almost there, right? Like I'm like,
according to my
fully launched, right? At that point,
our survey has long been able to rent cars.
Now it's starting into possibly having children at some point.
It's interesting you say that, because I'll continue that analogy. It sort of has. We have now. It's sort of spawned in a sense that we've got a finance survey that it will be still part of, it's still living at home.
Yeah.
It's still going to be part of the survey. If you are a finance professional, or if you know a finance professional, someone in there, you'll be able to send them the survey and just send them the link to just take the finance section and the relevant demographics and things of that nature that will deal with finance systems, reasons for having finance, the problems they're trying to solve, the standard sort of stuff, but looking at those type of systems. Very interesting stuff.
And we should note that in the finance section, it's asking about sort of the core finance systems, which is your general ledger, your accounts payable, those things. It's also asking about expense management and travel management technology and financial planning right now. So those are kind of the four areas that we're sort of focusing in this first round of that survey. And I do love your analogy because, yes, it is still living at home, which many of the 30-somethings are saying that they still have to do because of the current economy, which is a big frustration, I think, for many of them. But at this point, the goal is to really figure out the connecting points between what's happening in the HR systems and the finance systems. And we're going to have some interesting news this week that talks about how the AI conversation is going across that, impacting some of the people who work in those industries, and how we're starting to see that sort of come together. As you and I both know, I'm not a proponent of the CIOs, CFO, CHRO having to merge jobs, but we do think there is going to be a lot more crossover than we've seen in the market because of what AI is doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that we're going to be talking about this week that's relevant to the survey is legal and compliance and risk issues, which will also be one of the sections of the survey that will be new. We've always talked about compliance because how do you not in our space? Yeah. But to have its own section talking about the systems that are endemic to compliance and risk management will be in there, along with, again, the sort of problems we're trying to solve for, the barriers to usage and that type of thing. So if that's an area of special interest to you, make sure you take the survey. By the time you hear this, or view this, because we're also on YouTube, This survey will be out through our distribution network. So that goes out on the 15th. If you have not received a link, it's possible you're not connected through one of our distributors. Let us know if you're just champing at the bit to take it. Otherwise, the public launch will be on April 20th. So definitely take it by then.
And if you go to our website, right in the front is a button that says so participate in the survey. Click on it, you put your email in, and then you'll get a direct email. I will say, because we do know everybody's getting a ton of spam, everybody's getting a lot of weird links these days. Our link will always say Sapient Insights, and then if you get it from a distributor, it will also have the sort of the name of the distributor in that sort of long link. So make sure that's what you're getting. It also, can't remember, I think Tammy still has the word Qualtrics in them too, because Qualtrics is the survey tool that we're using. So which means that it is also all the data you send us in that survey is secured with the same level of governance and GDPR regulations and ISO variations of certifications that all your own internal engagement surveys and things that you use for many organizations. So it is very highly secured. We actually mask everybody's names. Nobody's name gets used in marketing. All of that important stuff for us. It is really important that this is a solution or a service from a survey perspective that is really just to gather the data from the market and the industry. So our goal is to make sure that it is real people taking it. And then once we know that, basically all the data gets masked.
Yeah, really well said. We've kind of been talking about, these sort of other areas that are connected to HR, right? That's if last year was all AI, this year has been a lot of this talk about where does HR and where does work tech blend? And I think this first story is a pretty good indication. We've mentioned Canva a few times on this. And in fact, again, listeners, viewers, by the time you hear this, I will have already been, or I will be at Canva Connect in Los Angeles. And they start off by with some of their acquisitions. Just happened yesterday at the time of recording. They acquired SimTheory and Orto for AI and marketing, respectively. So SimTheory, pretty interesting because it gives sort of lay people the ability to build AI agents. So if you think about Canva's core ability to bring design to people that maybe don't have, a design background, the same idea of building AI agents in an easy to simple use interface is the concept there. And Orto is pretty interesting to me because we talk about this blend, especially this happens in recruiting, right? Where we have something called recruiting marketing, which is what it sounds like. If you're not in a talent acquisition space, it's the idea of how do you make your job sound interesting to different types of people that, you think about what marketing is. And Orto does the automation for marketing professionals. So, your in-app messaging, your push notifications, forms and surveys, again, to make it sort of simplified and easy to use for anyone. So those two acquisitions, you can kind of see why that all fits into a design suite that people are using for those purposes.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting is they say that these are growing suite of marketing products. Both companies were founded by brothers, Chris and Mike Sharkey, right? Like, so that's interesting in and of itself, previously co-founders of Stays. But I think the other side of this, which I kind of caught in on the Smithery, if I'm saying the name of that acquisition correctly, was they say an AI workspace and collaboration platform. I want to just hone in on that word collaboration because I think that's a key that a lot of organizations are missing when they think about what AI is doing for organizations. We definitely have AI assistants. We have AI agents and AI management. We're going to talk a little bit about who's going to own that management. We've talked about that before. And then we have sort of AI intelligence. But I do think this collaborative area where people can get together and see what AI is saying and you each kind of put your points in this. This is the one thing I saw Dayforce do really well with their collaboration platform. I see a couple others come out with that. I just think that's a space we should really be watching carefully. Jira is working on some of this stuff, I think, right now at Atlassian's selection. This is, to me, more than what we see right now with Copilot and some of the other tools. This is truly a place where thinking can happen together. Ideas can be thrown around with AI helping us organize it, right? And so I think that's going to be an interesting play for a lot of organizations, right? And Canva's a big place for that, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. The collaboration is what really makes it more interesting than just saying, okay, here's something that can help you build AI agents, and that's right in what they're looking to do too, right? Because the idea is to make teams to work with AI, and our work with, what I mean is Sapient Insights work with Claude is one of the things that's been interesting to our team is that rather than you just make an individual query, you have a project that anyone can jump into, right? And that's what SynTheory seems to be able to do, is that you build something that's specific to your business, but you can still collaborate across different groups because each different group will have different sort of tasks that they're trying to achieve, different goals that they're trying to reach, but it can all be done with one agent that's pulling info from different areas and building these tools that can be used collaboratively. Is I'm sure the term that they would use across these. So pretty interesting. And again, one of those things that you start to see the application in more than just what we would call traditional HR roles.
Yep. Yeah, no, I love that Canva's coming into our world, and we know a lot of HR use it every day because they show up in our data set, right?
That's right. Exactly. A more traditional HR tool couldn't be more well-known in the space is Workday, who is doing some expansion into India. In fact, they've opened an entire global capability center in Chennai. So pretty interesting. Stacey, you are the Workday whisperer. Tell us what's going on.
This is not surprising. It's interesting. We're going to have a little bit of a story later on about some layoffs and how they're impacting the Asia Pacific market. Our data definitely showing the Asia Pacific market is seeing actually some downsizing in tech overall roles and investments. But we are seeing that there are also a lot of organizations trying to expand their footprint and their actual customers in the Asia Pacific market. Now, this is what Workday's actual language here is that this specifically is focused on signals the continued investment in its AI and machine learning in this region, right? And its capabilities at a time when the company's sort of really focusing on AI as its center conversation. And so this is a global capability center in Chennai, one of the fastest growing areas, and its expansion of the company's engineering and development footprint in South Asia, which again, they've got people all over the world at Workday. Like they've been doing development globally for quite some time. I think this is the expansion is the conversation here, and the additional investment in those regions where they actually want to grow their business model as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that as well, we get expansions, at least in terms of partnerships between SD-Works and Datascale HR. So this is not that dissimilar in a certain way to the Canvas story, in that Datascale HR is very much a AI type platform, right? So it's the AI tools, the data infrastructure. We've talked about that before quite a bit, right? Is you're being able to buy the data and sort of get in quickly, so that SD-Works has a better capability of transformation through AI, rather than just sort of saying, okay, we're going to build out AI. They've already got not just the tools, but again, having that infrastructure and that ability to access data. I feel like all we're doing is teasing later stories, but that becomes very important, of knowing sort of how and where to pull data from, which is, I would say, been a barrier to usage, even though we don't see it so much in the data. I think anyone now that's had some experience with AI understands that sometimes data retrieval and understanding where and exactly what data is important is an issue. So if you have more structure in your data, it allows your AI agents to better create and present data to you that's more meaningful to the project you're actually trying to solve.
Yeah, it's context, and it's the road and the pathways, right? I think the conversation, so it's good to know. So Datascale HR has been around for a while. They're actually well known. Tilakia, who is a good friend of ours, talks about them quite a bit, right? But they're also partners with like Strata, Zealous, EPI. So a lot of the payroll service providers, global integrators is what they call them, right? And so these solutions really are, it kind of together sort of data and syncs it up and helps you make more sense of it, as Cliff is talking about. And we're hearing more and more about Datascale HR sort of becoming a partner for a lot of these organizations, right? They say they're in 150 countries, they've got 1.5 million validated sort of mappings. And that's the thing you're looking at, right? Is that mapping that it does, those connectors that it creates.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're going to hear more about this. The one thing, and I'll be writing a little bit about this in a post I'm going to be putting out today, so you might want to look at it, is one of the big things I took out of Transform that I think, there's a lot of things people are talking about, but I don't think people are talking enough about data management. And so that is a space where I think we are talking about data aggregation, but we're not talking about ongoing data cleaning, right? Like there's a process of getting our data into a certain location, and then becomes the conversation of how do I make sure it's continuously updated and continuously cleaned. And I've had some conversations with a few organizations around this recently. How do I understand the lineage? How do I understand the history and the continuous maintenance of it? And I think that's going to become a bigger conversation over time. A really good example we'll talk about is how inaccurate data can have a really big impact sometime at a sort of life and death matter on what's happening in the market, particularly in the AI space, right?
Yeah, I mean, literally in this case. But we've made sure to have this positive news. We're going to get into some of the deep stuff later. It's like the old compliment sandwich. We're going to start good, a little bit of constructive criticism, and then back to good. Another cool, fun one, though, this is definitely goes in the good category, is P&I. As they put it, joining forces, right? With iSolved. I think what we're talking about here is strategic partnership, right? And Stacey, you did some work on understanding exactly what this means. I know that some of this is making understanding of press speak and things of that nature.
And if you look at P&I, so they're a strategy consulting services provider for HR. So they do 401k. It looks like sort of a lot of different sort of services. A lot of people sort of look at it probably a little bit like an ASO model, maybe. And I don't want to say that for sure because we haven't talked to them. I don't know all the pieces and parts of what they're doing. But what it looks like is that they are going to now leverage, at least from what I can tell. And so I'll say this as we haven't spoken with them. But what we can tell is that they are leveraging iSolved as their underpinning solution. And part of the reason we wanted to highlight this, again, there's a lot of these kind of relationships that happen every week, to be honest, with organizations like iSolved and others that become sort of the partnership of preference for some of these big consulting firms. They also have a couple other organizations that they partner with as well when you go out to their website. But I do think we're going to see, again, with the case of AI being part of these conversations, one thing that we do know is that, understanding the platforms that you're working with makes it a little bit easier right now, anyways, like with anything else, to sort of tie AI into your environment better, right? And for consulting firms and services-based firms, AI is a solution they're using to help them do a better job of helping their customers, right? It sees things quicker, it understands auditing, it helps customer service maybe answer questions faster, all those kind of things we're seeing organizations put in place. And I do think we're going to see some more picking sort of vendors you definitely want to work with or tech you want to work with. We did this. We made the decision to select Claude because Claude works better in our perspective with Office 365. And that was very specifically picked because, funny enough, we could not figure out how to get, and I know that's not for everyone, but for our particular instances, the way things were set up, we couldn't figure out how to get Microsoft's own AI tools to kind of do the things we needed it to do within our Office suite environment in a safe and secured way, in a way that the team could see it as a whole versus an individual, which is part of what Cliff talked about as a collaborative thing. And so these are some of the things I think, you're going to see even service providers making big decisions about tech that they're partnering with in a way that we probably haven't seen as much previously. And so this is just an example of one of those, I think, right?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. More positive news. There's some fun ones. Kelly Satterfield's joining Awardco, or at least joining their Awardco Center of Excellence team as a rewards and recognition executive over at Awardco. Another one that shows up very positively in the rewards and recognition space in our survey. Another area that we've seen quite a bit of expansion in over the last few years. Rewards and recognition, I believe we've had in the survey now for about 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, I think we're going on our third year now.
Yeah. Harkening back to our beginning of our conversation when we were doing the child analogy, it's sort of a child now that can talk. It has its own. It's got things to say. Before we were sort of holding its hand and getting it through. And it's really interesting now to see that space. And it's another one where we have seen more connections throughout the business. It used to sort of be a standalone to the point when we weren't even sure whether rewards and recognition, where does that connect to, right? Is that connected to compensation? Is that connected to performance? Employee recognition obviously could be part of employee engagement or, employee listening. So it's very interesting. And it's interesting too that, we're starting to see some of the people that we are seeing moving into these executive roles for that exact reason.
Right, with a lot of practitioner experience. Kelly, I knew I'd actually had an opportunity to sort of do an informal information interview with Kelly Satterfield. Some friends had introduced us. She was talking
Oh,
about kind of what was her next direction, right? She had been working with Richard Rosenau, who we know from Akana,
yeah.
who is doing a lot of sort of work in sort of understanding the HR tech landscape and how that rolls into sort of the people analytics and metrics that you're doing for your HR function. Kelly had also worked in the past with other organizations that we'd known, other people that we knew. So I thought it kind of fit with what we were talking about, which is, one, practitioners kind of rolling into sort of different roles where they're giving great advice. Two, this idea, like we talked about, of this growing rewards and recognition conversation on what does that look like in the new market, because it's different in an employer-led business model than it is an employee-led business model. In an employer-led business model, there's a lot more focus on outcomes for the business, not just engagement at the employee level. The idea is that those two things should tie together. But oftentimes, one versus the other becomes more important when depending on what market you're in, right?
Yeah, and also has to do with long term versus short term. Something I think we talked about in the last episode is sometimes the PE goals could be very valuable in the short term, whereas people moves tend to be a little more long term for a number of different reasons.
Exactly. So we're wishing Kelly a lot of luck in her new role and excited to see what she does with it. So, yeah.
Also wishing luck to Amy Brar, who's been appointed General Manager of Workforce Management at UKG. Very interesting, too, because just the idea of having, I think I've made it sound like, doing something in a silo or doing something on its own is negative, but the idea of putting this much attention into workforce management as a sort of its own thing that requires its own sort of general manager, because I believe this is a whole new role over at UKG, I think signals their increased interest in that space, right?
Yeah, general managers, they have not had that level of roles. Cells over at also runs sort of UKG Ready. So we've got some friends who are going into that. Gretchen Alarcon took on UKG Pro. So they are kind of creating senior level roles at the highest level around each of their product areas, which is really important because product has to be a big focus for UKG. That their number one thing is to get all those products working in a way that their customers can leverage. Because we do know that as these things integrate, are so powerful, right? But part of it is that all the products tended to kind of grow up individually. So now they're kind of figuring out how to connect those dots. And that's a big part of product strategy. Amy has been there for a long time. We've known her for many years. Got a chance to just talk to her not too long ago. She grew up through the Kronos days and has been there also as VP of Experience and VP of Workforce Management. So it was wonderful to sort of see that she got the opportunity now to take on the general manager role and really lead and guide what's happening in the workforce management space. I'm excited to see how these really powerful general managers work. We also know that they've got like an AI general manager strategy role as well that's kind of going across all of these roles. So UKG, I think, is really trying to figure out how they take one of the largest data sets in the market and one of the biggest groups of variations of customers, because they have such a wide mix of customers in their data set, and really figuring out how these solutions should have work at an individual level for each of those organizations, but still has a connective tissue across all of them, right?
Yeah, I think it also feeds in, to their frontline worker focus as well, right?
That experience. Yeah, so excited to see where this goes. Congratulations to Amy. We're looking forward to seeing the next steps there.
Yeah, exactly. We're also looking forward to seeing the next steps. We're really on the child analogies today. From newborn business. Okay, I'm going to stop it with that one. Jess Von Bank and Jason Averbrook. I don't believe they said what the new company is, but they are members of the analyst community previously with Mercer. And they have announced on LinkedIn that they are leaving to start their own new company. Possibly the name will be out by the time of you listening to this, but this time we don't know. But what's interesting is that they're saying they're building it from scratch using nothing but AI. Oh, no, they do have the name. Sorry, it's Now to Next. I thought that was just Jess being Jess and be like, oh, it's going to be Now to Next, but that actually is the name.
I think that's the name. Yeah, exactly. I believe so. Correct us if we're wrong, Jess.
Yeah, Jess, let us know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what I really liked was this, how basically she noted that this is more than a company. It's a strategy plus tools, content plus media, and community plus lab. So there's a lot of pieces and parts in this, built for everyone, they say. So my sense is that this is more than just the HR community, because they're going to be talking about students and CEOs and line managers and leaders. So I'm assuming it has a lot to do with the AI focus that Jason's been sort of driving for the last couple of years throughout the work that he's doing with Mercer and them. So we're wishing them luck with the new endeavor. Excited to see where they go, and exciting to see what happens next for this. So we've already talked about the fact that we all need to, because they're using Claude as well. Based off of what I saw at the Transform event, I think as a business tool, Claude seems to be taking the lead. We're seeing that number rise in almost every number that we see in our stats, right? It'll be interesting to see where it's at now when we do the survey this year. But we were all talking about the fact that we're going to sort of share notes on how Claude is doing as a partner in our strategy work inside of these businesses, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so this is, this starts to sort of transition. We got some good news, bad news coming up now. So the first one is going to be me being a bit of a wet blanket on what sounded like some good news, where we saw the March job reports, and it was much higher than expected. We were expecting possibly, I think they were expecting around 12,000 or so added in the United States. Instead, it was 178,000. For those of you on video, I'm putting air quotes, only 4.3% unemployment. But as Kirsten Greggs points out on her LinkedIn post, which we'll put the link to, the numbers don't tell the whole story, and that's kind of where I saw it as a data analyst too. A lot of the previous couple months had been revised down so that the jump seemed higher. Also, unemployment rate is a very fickle number. It's not as simple as saying, here's the amount of jobs and here's the amount of people that don't have jobs. You have to, in survey, say that you're actively looking. If you give up, or give up's a little rude for those of us, but if you drop out of that for whatever reason, if you say you're no longer looking, that could be because you have been deported, or it could be because you have just not found anything, or it could be that you're severely underemployed, or you're doing gig economy, whatever the case may be. You no longer count in that percentage. So it can make it seem like the unemployment rate is lower than it actually is. And what Kirsten points out is that also is only in the aggregate. Just like in our survey, we always like to say, what are the sizes? What are the industries? Well, she notes, and I think extremely importantly, that this doesn't bring up things like Black unemployment, which is nearly double. For Black men, it's 7.3%. Sorry, that's, it's close to double. We'll call it 8.6, 7.3, and 7.1 overall for Black employment. And for all of these, 6.1% unemployment rate for Black women. So even with these somewhat massaged numbers down, it's still a much more drastic unemployment rate for minorities out there. And so we see that there's some jobs, but we also know that a lot of this is being affected by federal unemployment as well, where we've lost the vast majority of employees. Some of that is being revised through people going back in by winning their court cases. It says they're illegally let go. But this is just another thing. I feel like we're sometimes on our high horse here about data, but we're about to talk about some severe job losses, and just one, which to be fair was so new, it wouldn't have gone into this report. But sometimes just the overall numbers don't tell you the whole story. And it also, I advise people to think about where the data is coming from and to start looking about what does it actually mean and how is it compiled. It's why our section of the survey involving demographics and methodology is 25 pages.
Yes, I know. We often get asked, like, can we cut that out? We're like, yeah, no. So, it's interesting here. There's a couple of data points that I pulled out on this. I think one, to your point, that I think in today's current state, you have to do a triangulation of data when you're looking at jobs data. And I would definitely look at both labor statistic data. I would also look at data that comes out of ADP. We know that's very strong. Their economist model there is really good. Paychex also does a model on the SMB side. There's a couple others. I would leverage the data from many of the companies that we follow as well to just correlate and make sure like it's in sync. Because I think that, like anything else in this particular case, we recommend you always get different data sources, because people are making big decisions on this. Like this is where I put expectations for productivity, or how much food I'm going to put on a shelf, all of those things, right? But that discouraged worker number that you were talking about, to me, this is the biggest one, right? Like the The difference between people who are looking for work and people who've just dropped out of the looking for work state, and that is done through a survey right now, right? Like this is a survey that I've been in some of these, a lot of you have been in some of these. This is not just done through who's actually getting unemployment money, which is a different number that we see in the market. That number jumped to 510,000, up from 144,000 in a single month, a 39% increase. That means that many people just decided to step out of the workforce. Now, I think you are right. There is a couple of things happening here. I do think the immigration laws are having an impact on this because there are a lot of people who were looking for work, who were immigrants, who right now are just choosing not to because it's not safe, right? So they might be completely stepping out of the work environment and maybe leaving the country or not. Or the other thing is that we know a lot of women have make the choice not to go back to the work environment and are actually starting a lot of small businesses. We see small businesses up by like 20-30% for a lot of small women because they're finding that environment just works better for them personally, and they're getting higher levels of respect and pay through that. But I do think also too, we're just getting a level of frustration with, there are a lot of people who are kind of waiting to see if it's going to get better later, right? Which is a conversation I'm seeing from a lot of organizations and people that I talk to. So this is a big data point. I think we have to pay attention to this. I think we are going to start to see, we were very careful in our data to show that it wasn't going to be huge layoffs right now. This is not an AI conversation. This is what we would call a recession conversation, right? And whether or not we're there or not is a conversation I think all the different economists are sort of trying to make some decisions about. We'll see if some of the things like oil costs, travel issues, food costs, those things are going to have an impact over the summer holidays, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Especially, I saw, we talked a lot about the oil coming through the Strait and that being disrupted, but also I think something around 30% of the world's fertilizer was also cut through. So yeah, and that takes a long time for it to,
cycle through the system.
Yeah. So that, we're definitely in the, the bad part of the sandwich. We're in the broccoli now. We'll get to some dessert later. Going into that question about layoffs that we've alluded to a couple of times, Oracle laying off, tens of thousands of employees, and you did some research here, Stacey, on, I think we had 30,000 people, I think was the number.
It's between 20 and 30. I don't think the actual number has been completely released yet. There will be numbers, I'm sure, released, but that's the impact, is between 20 and 30,000.
Yeah, and so, we're data people, right? So we're going to talk a little about this because the whole story isn't just the 30,000 people. I mean, if you're one of those people, of course, our hearts go out to you and sympathy goes out to you. But I think it's important to understand where they're being cut and what the long-term impacts are going to be beyond just, the short-term gain or whatever you want to call it of not having to pay those salaries, which we definitely have talked about, which is that can have a lot of impacts on some of Oracle's long-term plans, especially when it comes to data centers and things like that, which is where a lot of the cuts are having to come from. So it's kind of a poison pill to be swallowing, I think, right? You've got some of the numbers on where people are going or where people have been cut from the different departments, right? And some of the key details.
Yeah. So first I want to note that the official story is that AI is replacing roles that are no longer needed. So I think that is the official story and stock prices go up because of it, and people are very excited about the concept of AI. But when you really look at what's happening, and I think these numbers, I haven't completely verified these. These are actually put out by a friend of mine who posted them, but I think they're pretty close, which is that Oracle borrowed, and I think, Cliff, you've been talking about this story, about $58 billion in the last 2 months, right? Like we've seen those stories coming out to fund what they're doing on the AI side. They raised $50 billion in bonds in February. They committed to $156 billion in the AI data center CapEx. And now they need $8 to $10 billion in cash flow. That again, this is not my data set. I will say we'll reference the LinkedIn post that put this out. It's like a friend of mine. I do trust their data, but I think double verify those numbers for yourself, right? But what it tells me is that they're saying this isn't because we are cash strapped. This isn't because we need to, because their profits actually have been very good, quite good over the last year or two in the work that they're doing. But they are having to fund what they're doing. So there is a a financial metric to this conversation that is buried a little bit underneath the, well, we did well last year, so why are we cutting people, right? Then on the flip side, we look at what categories they cut, right? Depending on which numbers you look at, it's around 18 to 20% of their sort of workforce is being laid off across various different groups, right? But what we saw is that there's really some big areas that, at least from what we understand, one is Oracle Health and Revenue Science. That is a big area. About 30% of the reductions happen in that area from what we understand. Now, Oracle Health is an area that Oracle has doubled down on multiple levels. And many people may not know this, but they actually own the application that runs healthcare, like the data for many hospitals and organizations, which particularly for the VA, their hospital, and they've run that project and those programs, and health has been a big part of it. Larry has gotten up on stage and said, we're going to mobile medical doctors, and the whole bit has been his vision of the future, right? So I'm interested to see that was a big cut. The other one was SaaS, which is their software as a service and virtual operation services. So that's sort of their cloud-based model right there. Big cuts in that. And then NetSuite got a big cut, it looks like, particularly their India Development Center.
Hello, this is Michael Vandervoort from the Drive-Thru HR podcast, where we discuss ideas, trends, and activities that impact HR, talent, HR technology, in the workplace. Our focus is on expanding knowledge and igniting curiosity as we hear directly from people who are shaping the future of the HR industry. Join us.
In our finance space, as we know, has been a growing application that organizations have been adopting at the mid-market and SMB level. Now, it is a direct competitor on some levels to some of the Oracle Fusion. So there's always that question of which level do I go there? So the question becomes, is NetSuite going to continue to get the level of investment that they've gotten in the past? And then a lot of engineering and development and sales and customer success, particularly account executives, sales reps, and pre-sales consultants. Again, not surprising. A couple of things I was surprised by the NetSuite conversation, but the bigger issue is that when we look at where these layoffs took a hit,
was interesting.
Yeah, you and I did not realize this until I was looking through some of the data that we found on, I'll be honest, we found it on Reddit. This is not in the open market, so it's probably, and so I could not get a source on this, so I'm giving you data that this is definitely tea, and I don't know how real the tea is, I'll be honest, but at least based off of what we've been able to get from different sources, and I did correlate with one other source, that there about 12,000 employees were affected in India, which was a pretty big hit, and then the remainder in the U.S. Now, we know from our data last year that unlike the U.S., where we did not see an in total expectation to decrease workforces. It was higher for big companies than it was for small companies, but if you took everybody in aggregate, there was actually an increased plan to increase workforce, especially if you took mid-market and SMB, which were balancing what was happening for the big, large enterprises. And that's kind of played out in most of the data that we've seen, right? But we saw APAC market actually had a huge drop in expected employee bases, and that fits what we're seeing here. A lot of organizations are decreasing major sort of what we call engineer centers, right, in that region. So that's some pretty big pivots. We do think some of that is sort of AI focused, maybe not AI driven, but AI focused, or it's just easier locations to sort of cut all in ones, right? So yeah, it's rough. None of this is fun, right? And I do think that people who, the AI, this is hard on the HR professionals. It's hard on the people going through it. There's been a lot of commentary about the fact that it was a 6 a.m. email that went out instead of it being sort of a individual personal conversation. Other counterpoints are, well, how do I do that many people layoffs with an individual conversation? I don't know, Cliff. I've done layoffs on myself. You've done layoffs. It's tough, but this hits hard because it's right in our industry, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to be we do talk to Oracle, and, I went to Cloud World last year, and they were so excited for all the new possibilities coming out. And it's hard not to see this as a consequence of overextension. And it's hard not to also see the consequences of when you lay off people like sales executives and customer service. That, yes, it can help offset some of the, pains that you're feeling from your debts, but that does have consequences down the road. And you can start to possibly see an early domino starting to fall that could have consequences. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's hard to see this and be like, that's a positive thing.
Well, they are banking on the fact that AI will catch up fast enough that this customer service
push that domino back.
right, that will push again. So, and again, we don't know if it will or not. Like this is a bank, because we know right now it can't handle everything that they cut. But I mean, Chris Leone's been online quite a bit about the huge investments that they've made on the AI front at Oracle, and I think Chris has a really strong vision of what they're doing in the AI space across the entire Fusion platform that we work with. And there's a lot of other applications and platforms. I think the conversation will come down, how quickly can they execute? Can they get it over the finish line before the customer starts to notice an impact on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, you had mentioned this sort of life and death thing, and this was another very impactful post. This one came from Laszlo Bock, honestly, of all people, that was talking about the real consequences of having of automating too many things, right? And specifically, he's talking about automation of weapon deployment in the Iran war. I mean, specifically talking about what led to the U.S. bombing a school in Iran. And it makes a point that, if your only goal is speed, right? If you're trying to remove people from the loop because that just leads to, latency, right? Slowing things down, then you remove, I guess the point that, some of the really big, the people, I mean, he's specifically calling out Alex Karp and Palantir here. But if they're really pushing that everything can be sped up faster and that you can make decisions quicker based on all this, that has to be deliberate on how people are put into that loop. It's not enough to just say, yep, this all looks good, I'm agreeing to that, and you press a button and then everything goes. You really need to be able to have the ability to understand what it is that you're looking at, right? Because if you just get a message that goes, this data has all been verified, you're going, okay, well, it's been verified. But, I think you had mentioned, Stacey, on a much lighter way of going through and triangulating the data, getting multiple data sources, figuring stuff out. Yes, that slows things down. And I could definitely understand why someone in a military mindset might say, that can make all the difference. But I think that, it is the term that they use is a sobering look, but, it is sobering. But I think it's important to discuss because the more we lay things off to AI decision making, this is probably the worst thing that can happen, but we also lead to layoffs. You lead to making what can seem like small decisions for your organizations that can have huge consequences. And I think it's also important to understand, because you'll hear a lot of this, is there's a human in the loop, right? But where in the loop is extremely important. It can't just be someone doing final sign off. It can't just be to bring it to a hopefully less consequential thing is something like hiring. If you're just going, oh, these are the 10 employees that have been given me, and this is the ranking. Do you agree with this ranking? And the human in the loop is going, yes, I agree with this ranking, without understanding what the decision-making tree that led to that and really getting a chance to read those resumes and understand it. You're going to run into some problems. And I can already hear the counter argument being like, then what's the point of AI? But I think it has to do with being deliberate. It may be that you don't realize all of those gains right at the beginning, that you do a slow rollout of these things until you truly understand where's the best place for human intervention. That's my take on it, but it's a difficult subject.
It's a very difficult subject. And for those who don't know Laszlo Bock, he was longtime senior VP of People Operations, CHRO, over at Google for almost 10 years. Before that, GE, and had been at there. And then since like 2016, he's sort of co-founded a couple other solutions. He's written some books. He's just been in the industry and really, I think, paying attention to what's happening. There was a couple things that, one, I've been wanting to talk for a while about the difference between sort of the LLMs and traditional AI and data aggregators. And all three of those things are playing major parts in this conversation. And Palantir is one of the biggest data aggregators in the market. And some people don't even know who they are. So one, you should know who they are. They are they do a lot of background check work. They do a lot of government work. They do a lot of data sophisticated data analysis for companies who are doing major sort of decision making across the globe, right?
Local police department, there's a very good chance they're using them to making their decisions on where to stick cops.
Yes, they traffic stuff, right? Like they've just got some of the biggest data sets in the world, and they do that by gathering up and just sucking up as much data and buying as much data as they can. The people who own it have a lot of different agendas for what they're trying to do. I know a lot of people who've worked with them and for them, and there's with all companies, there's sort of good and bad and sort of how you're thinking about it, right? But the idea is that I have a lot of friends who work in the Department of War, and they are now kind of front and center where they used to be just behind the scenes, where now all the learning, all of the contact, all the information goes through that Palantir model. So Palantir was the one who kind of created some of the AI that was used in this particular action that impacted the bombing decisions, which then impacted, obviously, the school children in the schools in Iran, which for any of us who are parents and for any of us who are just human beings was one of the saddest things we've seen in a very long time and is hard to sort of talk about. Politics and business and all that aside, what caught my conversation on this was that what Laszlo was really pointing out, and I think is really important, is one, we spent a lot of time after that happened talking about the fact that the government is using Claude in some of the decision making, but Claude was not in the mix in this conversation. No LLMs were in the mix because we have been building for many years traditional AI technology to help us make decisions about how to keep our servicemen, which I think is really important, out of harm's way, and using technology to make decisions on a day-to-day basis within the government environments that are making some of those really important and really critical and life-impacting decisions. What you see with that, though, is that as organizations like a Palantir keep compressing what they call, which is a very hard sort of language, but what they call sort of the kill chain, which is the chain before you make a decision to have an impact that's going to kill a human being, right? Those chains were put in place many, many years ago by high-level people and wanting to do the most important thing, which is make sure you are not impacting anybody who should not be impacted in a war environment, right? And along the step, there was human beings put in where data was put in and steps where people were double checking data, validating data information. As you kind of go process optimization to process year over year over year, they kept sort of reducing the places where the human being was in those chains and increasing the speed and increasing the data analysis and increasing the data through AI, traditional AI, not LLM AI, but traditional AI, which is much more algorithmic based, much more distinct on models and numbers and things that we know are very highly tested. But they kept taking the humans out of the various steps in the chains in the places that other people thought they were put in for very important reasons. And the idea was to reduce the amount of time we spend in conversation, because that is meetings, which are seen as wasted time by much of the tech industry that we talk about. I cannot tell you how many times people tell me, I do not want to have any more meetings. We need to reduce the amount of meetings. Meetings are a waste of time. In this particular case, those meetings were the places where someone would have caught the fact that in 2016, this particular building shifted from a military location to a school. Those were the meetings that were gotten rid of, where you would have had that conversation. And this is where I say all the time, we sometimes think we define waste based off of our perception as human beings. And I've been in this meeting and I haven't said anything and no one else, all I'm hearing is the person talking all the time. But sometimes we have to think that is because we're not leveraging that particular tool that someone put in place for the thing they put it in place for. We're not taking advantage of that time in the way that it was meant to be taken advantage of. We've lost we do this all the time in our own team meetings. I rework our team meetings on a continuous basis because it gets real easy to just feel like you're hearing a monotonous conversation over and over. And so we rethink, how do we get people to talk? How do we get people to interact? That's probably what needed to be fixed, not reducing the amount of meetings, right? Yeah. And rubber stamping needed to be fixed. And this is why the level of human in the loop and having human in the loop is not the conversation. It is the criticality of the collaboration of the human in the loop with the data. How much do they have a say? How much are we validating with the human insight? And I'm going to say, always, in my perspective, we have to lean in to being a little bit inefficient in order to not impact people's lives, not impact our businesses, not impact our work. Go fast and break things does not work when a human being's life is on the line. And that is, I think we have to really address that. So that's my 2 cents on it. I think it's a conversation we have to sort of get into in this AI space because it is part of it, right?
No, I'm all for that. All right, so normally there's no reason to do a cute little segue because that's an important conversation, but we'll just move on. This was an article put out, John Sumser put this out, or no, this is Murray Brown, actually. Sorry. Thank you, Murray, for that. But what they did was look at 6 of the biggest sort of consulting firms and their take on AI, right? So McKinsey said 57% of work hours are automatable. Forrester said it was 6%. Goldman Sachs said there's been 0 impact on the economy from AI. PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, said productivity is quadrupled. And the National Business Review said 90%, we've actually talked about this study, Economic Review, sorry, said 90% report no impact whatsoever. And then he goes through PGC, or they go through PGC and KPMG. So they had same data points that they're working with, but drew different conclusions, right? And so they point out one signal is consistent across all 6. Graduate hiring has already slowed considerably across every firm. That's not a prediction, that's already happened. So what do you do with this? Knowing that, what do you do about this sort of meta study? And I think it goes back to something, Stacey, that you've been talking about since before I even joined, that was kind of refreshing to me when I joined, which is moving away from this idea of best practices. Because what is best practices, right? That would be taking all of those numbers and just saying, what is it that most of the firms are saying, right? That would be like, okay, well, that's best practices. That's what the biggest firms are saying. This is what most people are doing. Right? We instead call that popular practice for that same reason. And yeah, there's value to be had there. It's interesting to see that. But if you start looking at your particular industry, may be heavily much more affected by AI, as we saw from the Oracle layoff numbers. They found that they could possibly handle sales and customer service through AI. And that is part of the industries we are seeing impact. So if you go to someone in those industries, going to your point about seeing them as humans and not numbers, right, Stacey, and you go, hey, there's no impact of AI. And they're going, I'm out of a job, mate. I don't know what you're talking about. It's not going to fly. So you got to really start thinking about when you see these data points is where, going back to where's the data coming from, but also what does that mean for your industry? What does that mean for the size of your workforce, your region, the geographical area you're in? There can be a lot of different ways that you see impact. And also not everything has to do with just simple numbers. Anyone that's worked in a small business, or honestly, I could say any corporate job, knows that sometimes decisions are made that aren't purely logical. Someone might just say, I've been told to do more with AI, to cut 10% of my team, replace with AI, because that's the mandate that's been put down, and it's done, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense on paper. There's still a lot of gut feelings going out there. So I thought it was very interesting because it sort of validates a lot of what you've been talking about, Stacey's. Instead, looking at proven practices, look back and say what has worked based on the outcomes you were trying to achieve. I feel like I just preached to the priest, but
I know, yeah. Based on the outcomes you're trying to achieve and the type of organization you are and the things that are unique to you individually, right? Like not, and no two companies are alike, but there are some similarities, and culture has a big play. Other things have a big play. We look at all stuff, but I do think. I was just fascinated when I saw this. I don't think I even knew Maury, so it's not a person that it was just a fascinating thing of sort of aggregating all of these and not finding anything really that was the same across them, but yet they were all kind of saying these are best practices, these are ways that the companies are doing. It was an interesting take on sort of what I think. And again, I'm sure he used AI to do this analysis, right? So let's be very clear. I can't imagine trying to read these all with that kind of, focus. The one thing I think he said they all agree on is that AI transformation is people problem, not a tech problem. But after that, it all got, kind of messy. So I just love it when people sort of turn our own processes back on us sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's good to say.
Yeah. And it's a good point. Sometimes these episodes tend to have like a theme that I don't realize, but this one is about get multiple data sources.
Yeah. multiple data sources, and don't assume the meeting or the collaboration or the time it takes to have that conversation is the time is the or the friction, because I think that is a lot of what we're hearing is that we're taking friction out of work. That friction is always bad. There are places and times where those kind of conversations, the kind of things about what makes us unique, are really important. That will fundamentally be what makes AI actually work, is not averaging everything out. We will all be the same then. What will make it work is taking our uniqueness and working with it.
Yeah, and that's kind of a good summation. And I think that would be a good time to kind of get into I'm eventually going to ask Kelly to put in some sound
bite for our speed round.
Speed round. Yeah. So this is a kind of different story, or I don't even know what you want to call it, Stacey. This was, I think, one of those moments where something prompted you. I think it was a Claude email talking about some pricing changes that got you really thinking about a whole lot of different stories all at once. So I thought it'd be nice to sort of aggregate it, because, you were mentioning you're thinking about some of the stories we've been talking about over the last couple episodes about moving towards usage models that we've seen, right? Consumption models, meaning if you're using the
pricing for AI, yep.
Right. But we're also seeing things about, some effects of just the SaaS market in general with some of the stock prices changing. We're seeing connector charging models, data line charging models. What's going to be the end result of that? If we're seeing those prices go increase, does that mean we're going to see changes to the PEPM number? Is it yes and, or what is going on? So I am now turning the floor over to you. Those are all good questions. Tell us an answer. Give us some proof.
They're very good questions. So what prompted this was actually a marketing and a sales thing from Claude, right? So again, we've noted already, we're using Claude. I wonder sometimes, I'm like, so that's just going to make, there's a lot of conversations about that to be had. But they came out with this, hey, by the way, we're going to offer you something free, $200 to your team plan, redeem whatever you want to. We're like, oh, $200. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Nobody gives me anything for free, right? If you read below the line, what they're really stating is that starting on April 4th, the third-party harness is like OpenClaw. Now, OpenClaw is the tool that a lot of organizations are running in the background to actually run kind of a server agent thing on their computer to go get their emails, to kind of connect all the little AIs and basically send things off to the AIs to do work, right? Kind of like it's an open source program. It's kind of a little connector tool. It's a really, and basically what they're saying is that if they're running OpenClaw or something like that to connect your team account, will draw from extra usage instead of your subscription. So in the subscription, you kind of get unlimited use of just sort of general in there asking prompts. But there is if you're doing extra things, you get charged extra tokens and money, right? And if your team doesn't use them, no changes. If they do, the credit and bundles this $200 should sort of ease you into this. But this really comes down to every AI, every vendor that we're talking to is talking about the difference between use inside a system, which is generally a PEPM, an individual user, per employee per month, which again, I didn't realize. I was talking to an IT analyst and they're like, PEP, and he goes, oh, I'm like, yeah, we use PEPM all the time in HR. He goes, because that's how.
Because they try and define those, and I didn't.
Yes, yeah, per employee per month charges. And what we find in the market right now is that as we decide to let other things access the system, is that access point a point at which we can charge? Because now I might have fewer people in the system and they might all access it in another interface. I'm just pulling data out to basically do the work. We've had this issue with analytics platforms for a while. There's been other tools that have had this issue. This is not a new concept in the market. It's just hitting AI, I think, pretty hard at a really high level and impacting the SaaS conversations and SaaS software stock prices, because the two things are colliding together. We are hearing things like organizations, Workday, as someone said the other day, I don't know about if this is the case, but they're like, they're charging by the line. I'm like, okay, by the cell line, by the data line? Like, what does that mean, right? So I think everybody is sort of frantically trying to figure out what will the cost be if every connector that's pulling data is going to actually be charged, because that actually reduces the amount of time I'm willing to do that. And if anybody remembers the day of cell phone charges and the per minute costing that we went through, and how many times I would do number 4-231 to figure out where to pick me up because it was a per number, per cost text, right? And I was very young at that time. Cliff and I were babies, right?
Remember they collect calls.
Yes, collect calls. Pick me up, yes.
Pick me up at the movie theater at 8.
We're going to have this situation. We're going to have to figure this out. Yeah. If you're a buyer, you have to be looking at this. You can no longer think of AI as an unlimited source.
That's right. And I was about to say, that's what's driving this, is that harkening back to, we think about the Oracle layoffs, and, they took huge loans out. Some of that coming from OpenAI themselves, that is going to pay them back somewhat on inference, meaning the usage of their software to drive decision making. But then you also have the physical space, right? And they need loans from that. And, so SoftBank's going to eventually come collect, and whoever else. And so which often happens with new technologies, for the beginning, we've been getting it at free or at a severe discount. But that is not what it actually costs, just in pure, the compute and the physical items.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be right. Wait, are we elevating too fast? My concern is that we're going too fast to a pay model before people are actually getting the benefit out of it. That's my concern. I don't disagree with the concept that we've got to go there. I just think that businesses are not taking into consideration that people may not be getting as much outcome out of it yet. So the question is, if I pull back too soon, I may never get the outcome out of it that I want, right? So that's the balance you're going to have to find.
Yeah, someone should design a survey wherein we ask people what's the return on investment they're getting. Hint, hint, listener. So another thing that's happening with the actual usage of AI, right? We've been talking about the tools themselves, and we've brushed on this, but it's really been coming up quite a bit. Daniel Pink, author, even though I have a few of his books around, I'm blanking on some of his more famous ones, right? He had put out some of what's going on, and this goes right in my wheelhouse psychologically, of why we're seeing this issue of this AI, of people just over-relying on AI, and the what they call the narcissism problem, right? Which is basically that it goes beyond just, the AI saying, that's a great question, or whatever, that people think. It's also because it's a question of familiarity and pattern recognition, right? So he points out that the more familiar a thought becomes, the more true it feels, even when it's not based on facts. So this also goes to the story we just talked about taking a bunch of data sources and coming up with a completely different conclusion, because the brain wants to sort of figure out a reason why. And if you already have a reason why, even if you're not consciously aware of it, you can make the data fit. It's a constant issue, right? It's not just for us data nerds. This is true of all of us. And we're starting to all come across this in the use of AI, that, our brains are getting sort of rewired. So be careful about just repeating these facts. I think this is also something we've seen in the AI marketing, where we've been told, it's inevitable, it's happening. And you hear that so much, you're like, it's happening. And not really like, is it though? Is it really happening? So pretty interesting. I know
the hype, creating the hype.
I'm talking, but go ahead.
Yeah, no. This one I thought was interesting. It is, our brains are plastic. It also gets to the fact that I think every one of the current LLMs are based on the idea that every brain is a really big stats engine, right? Like there's that belief is that if I will create a real brain if I get enough stats and a big enough engine. There's other things going on biologically in the human brain that makes us who we are that you got to keep in mind. So, right.
Which is funny because it also independently, John Sumser, finally, this one was the one from you, John, had a newsletter out, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, where he's talking about the same issue of chatbots and AI agents agreeing with you all of the time. And, there's some research that come out of MIT and the University of Washington that sycophantic chatbots cause delusional spiraling even in ideal Bayesians, because, you cannot write an academic article with a normal title. That's against the rules. That's actually short form academia. Basically saying that this isn't just a sort of bug that's happened because of the way chatbots, that this is actually designed in to be this sort of sycophantic, meaning that they're always agreeing with you, that they're kind of kissing up to you, to use that term, right? And that becomes a problem, sometimes with extremely dire consequences, when you're being told that everything you're doing is completely right. Themselves, the makers of Claude, have pointed this out in their own article called Towards Understanding Sycophancy and Language Models. So it seems that even when they're supposedly not directly programmed for it, that they tend towards that because those are the answers that users agree with.
We have to remember that, and again, LLMs are different than traditional AI, and there are other forms of AI that we should keep in mind. This is just the most recent version of this model, right? But LLMs particularly, like you've multiple times said, Cliff, they are built to predict the next thing you would want to or would say. And you are generally going to go based on something that is familiar to you, or a story you want to tell, or an answer you want. And so, they're a little bit better than the next fortune teller, right? They're reading your palms, they're reading what you're doing, they're reading how you're thinking about it on some level, right? And you just have to be aware of that, right?
Yep. And another one, which is pretty interesting, also from John Sumser, which was who will win the battle of AI agent management. And I like his point was, he's kind of summarizing, I think a lot of us have fallen in this idea of like, okay, who's going to be the one to last through all this? Are we going to be ChatGPT? Are we going to be Copilot? But instead, when we think about how almost any other technology comes out, it isn't just one. I mean, there's obviously some monopolies that are happening in the tech and every other industry, but generally there's always going to be specialization, right? And there's always going to be some fragmentation because different people have different needs. So understanding that and building your usage and governance around what you specifically need, I feel like we're kind of repeating this, is probably the better long-term play rather than trying to pick a specific AI agent because you think it will somehow win the race, whatever that means.
Yeah, governance is good. I know that we say it all the time. Governance is going to be the next change management conversation. I think when we look at our data set, it is just going to be the difference between whether you make it or not in this space.
I feel like a lot of people were starting to really think about this because our friend Jackie Clayton had the unspoken problem with the way AI is being deployed. Right. And I liked her opening statement, which is every company runs a background check on you, but nobody's checking them. Right. So it's like, what do we know about these systems with everything that's going on, which I think was a good one to sort of summarize everything that we're running into with these issues.
Yeah, I mean, this is the idea that Glassdoor was built off of. But, she's really pointing out that, you have expectations that the company will follow through on all the things it tells you, that the benefits will be what they tell you, and it's a contract to some extent. You're saying, I will give you my time, you will give me these things you tell me you're going to give me, and you're going to create this culture for me, you're going to give me this kind of support. And what Jackie's saying is that there's a lot of data out there that could tell us if that actually happens. And it's not just a couple of systems, right? Like this is part of that reality check of what I don't think companies realize is that this is a two-way game they're getting ready to play in a way that we're facing it right now in recruiting, with buyers or candidates using AI to write their resumes, to tailor them to companies, and companies using AI to sort and to write their job descriptions. AI talking to AI. We know that's happening. It's a big conversation. It's why a lot of this, they're trying to figure out the right answer to this in the recruiting space. I think we're going to see other places where we are seeing this kind of sort of AI to AI conversation that will have a bigger impact on companies than they probably realize right now, right?
Yep. And in fact, I'm going to, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but I'm going to plug We Have a Problem, and not just because it's me, but because it is. I have started hosting HR We Have a Problem. I know, big step down from Terry, but she's going to have her own show, don't worry. This week in the debut episode of me hosting, I actually talked to someone from Indeed that talks about this exact same issue, right? Because Indeed being on sort of both sides, right? They're not just doing an ATS, they're also working with candidates, and both of them are having this problem. Candidates are going, well, it's just an AI interviewing me anyway, so why wouldn't I just game the system? And the company's going, look, we're trying to hire someone here. All we're getting is AI resumes. And it's like, okay, well then, but if you're automating the system too much, right? So what do? How do you build that layer in between? Take advantage of the automation while at the same time bringing that human element in.
And I'm going to say the friction in that might have not been all bad. Just saying. Okay. All right. Cliff, we are down to our last minute here. We promised everybody that we would try to wrap up within our here. Don't know if we made it or not. Probably not. But we have events going on. So where are we going to start off with events, Cliff?
Well, like I said, by the time many of our listeners hear this, we'll have already been to some of these, but so this may be a little bit post haste, but we're post haste, after the fact. But I believe you're going to be at Infor in Atlanta this coming week, meaning the 13th to the 16th. I will start off that week at ADP's Meeting in the Mines in Orlando, just down the road from me. And then I will be jumping on a plane on Tuesday night to head out to LA for Canva Create. I will get a little more detail on what's going on with that. The following week now, Stacey, and hopefully some of these lines have cut back by then, you're going all the way over to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam.
I am. I'm going to HR Tech Europe, put on by our good friends at HR Executive Magazine. I will be there April 20th through 24th. If you will be there, please connect with us. We want to talk. I'll be running 2 sessions. One is their sort of intro session to HR technology, which is actually more like a mini workshop that starts the beginning and the end of the show. So I'm really excited to do that. We will also be running the global HR technology conversation, and we'll be sharing the data that really is only available there at this point on what we're seeing in the data this year for global and international companies. And then you'll be that week going to Workday Innovation over in Napa Valley in California. That's your first innovation session for Workday, which is a really big deal because those sessions are really quite interesting. You learn as much as given that one. Same thing with the following week. I'll be at Oracle's Summit for analysts in San Francisco. I'll be flying back from the UK environment, and then you'll be heading to New Jersey, right?
Well, first I'm going to stop by Orlando.
That's right. Yeah.
And go to WorkHuman, talk about an event also that is a little bit off the, I don't want to say off the beaten path, but it definitely brings in a whole lot of different types of people from all over, not just HR. But then, yes, I head up to the Bell Labs in Holmdel, New Jersey for iSIMS, a big event. And the fun doesn't stop because the week after that, you're actually going to be moderating a panel, right, for ADP?
Yep, be moderating their ADP Women at Work 2026 Summit. I'm very excited about that. It's virtual, but I haven't done this yet. I'm very excited to do this. We have some really good conversation that we're going to be building in around that. And then you and I, depending on sort of how this plays out, will be May 18th to the 20th at the Salary.com Roadshow. That will be here in the Raleigh Triangle area. And then I believe that right around the same time is a Cornerstone Analyst Summit. We're not sure who's going to be going to that one as well. So that's going to be in New York. So we will be kind of meandering all over the place for a little while, but Cliff, it's going to be if anybody wants to connect up with us, please let us know. We're going to try and make time for everybody because we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I already mentioned that I've got HR. We have a problem, but we've got other things other people we should thank too.
We should, yeah. So let's wrap today. As we wrap today, a couple of just a good reminder, survey will be out by the time this comes out. Make sure you're looking for it. The annual HR system survey is the largest in the industry. It is the place to get the knowledge if you want it. And if you participate, you get the whole report, not a summary, not a piece. And it is a 300-page report. So yes, I know we ask you to take a lot of time. You're taking the report, but I promise you it is well worth it. And if you're a distributor, this is the time to get started. Please contact us because otherwise it's really hard to get into the middle of the process. Also, just as we wrap up, if you do not get updates on where we'll be at, what we're doing, and where things are at, please be sure to go to our website and sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates on our research launches where we'll be speaking, visiting, and when you can participate in the survey. Be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, now led by Cliff Stevenson, as well as, and if you'd like to get help and support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating, and review where you grab podcasts. That's really important to us. The more you leave a rating, we have heard you. We know it's too long. We know that is why our number is a little bit lower. We get it. We're working on it, guys. We're trying. It's really hard. We might have to turn this into a weekly podcast. I don't know, Cliff. Stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content. You can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And Cliff, as always, thank you for pulling all this together, putting out the details. You will get links to notes. If you go to LinkedIn, you follow Cliff, you will see that he's brought our favorite colleague up on the show as well, if you haven't gotten to see the puppies recently. Thank you to Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast, run by their amazing founder, Kelly, our marketing team, Summer Alano, Cole Harris, Linda Galloway, Caitlin Diamond, and many, many other people who help us get this all put up online. Thanks to our listeners and community. We could not do this without you. And that's it, Cliff, for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. We will be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR tech updates and insights from all of our events. So, bye everyone.